This morning, Ukraine is saying that Russia launched its largest overnight drone attack of the entire war, deploying almost 500 drones. Russia also claims that its forces have pushed into a central Ukrainian region for the first time since the war began. And in another move, CNN has learned Poland and allies scrambled aircraft as Russia's air campaign targeted western Ukraine near the border with Poland. And in the face of the stalled peace talks and an ever-expanding war effort, a bipartisan effort to slap more sanctions on Russia is gaining momentum in the U.S. Senate. And here is how President Trump responded to questions about this sanctions bill this weekend.
Yeah, use it if it's necessary. I haven't decided to use it. It's a very strong bill.
Joining us right now is Democratic Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts. He sits on the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thanks for coming in. So with all of these elements that I just laid out, you have this sanctions bill that really is gaining momentum in the Senate and gaining support in the House, but being led by Senators Graham and Blumenthal. I asked Senator Blumenthal when he was on why he thinks that the president himself hasn't decided if he wants to move on this sanctions bill when it has so much support. Let me play for you what the senator said.
One of the mysteries to me, Kate, and your question goes to the heart of Putin, in effect, playing Donald Trump. He's making a fool of him. And I have no good answer for why Trump has failed so far to endorse explicitly this bill.
Congressman, where do you think this is headed?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. Trump is a Putin puppet. He's completely in Putin's pocket. And that's the only conceivable reason why Trump would be opposed to this. I mean, even by his own, art of the deal, you're supposed to have leverage going into a negotiation. And this clearly increases Ukraine's leverage against Russia. Reminder, Ukraine is our ally, not Russia. Sometimes the president needs clarification on that. So where is this headed? Well, finally, some Republicans are getting the courage to do the right thing. That's encouraging. Of course, this was a bipartisan war effort, a bipartisan support for Ukraine, I should say, for a long time until Trump came back on the scene. So it's good to see Republicans in the Senate and some Republicans in the House as well doing what we've actually been doing all along, which is giving support to Ukraine. That ultimately is what we need to get a reasonable conclusion to this crisis.
And on that, this Wednesday, and 2 days from now, marks 2 weeks since President Trump said that he was going to give a 2-week deadline in announcing how he's going to proceed with peace talks. I took note of it because we've heard this 2 weeks deadline from the president before on many topics. He said, "I'll let you know in about 2 weeks," when he was asked in the Oval Office whether Putin wants to end the war. He's offered a deadline like this multiple times, just kind of pushing it out to make a declarative statement about his position on peace talks or what he actually thinks Putin's motivations are here. What do you think the administration, if not the president, but the administration is holding out for here?
I mean, Trump is still waking up to the simple idea that Putin's a bad guy who wants to continue this war, something that the entire rest of the world figured out a long time ago. So I don't know why Trump continues to hold out for Putin. I don't know why he continues to do what the Kremlin wants. But that's clearly what's going on here. He's hoping, against hope, against reality, against all the facts on the ground, that Putin actually wants to make a deal with him. And that's just not the case. What we need to do is increase pressure on Russia. The Ukrainians are doing that. We need to do it as well. And ultimately, that's the kind of leverage we need to bring Russia and Putin to the negotiating table to have an end to this conflict that doesn't just give a gift to Putin. Because if Putin walks out of this war thinking that he can just conquer any country that he wants, he could well go to NATO next, and that means U.S. troops are involved. And perhaps even more risky, it sends a message to Xi Jinping in China that he can do the same thing, that the Western world will let Xi Jinping get away with taking over a country just like they let Putin get away with it. And that could start World War III in the Pacific over Taiwan. So there's a lot riding on bringing this conflict to an end in a way that sends a message to Russia and the rest of the world that you can't do this. You can't be a war criminal. You can't just take over countries because you want to.
Something else that we're watching play out in real time right now is these violent protests and clashes between protesters in Los Angeles and law enforcement over immigration raids that have been happening in LA. The president's decision to send in the National Guard, despite the objection of the governor there, and now you have the governor saying that he is going to sue. Do you think that is the right move?
Do I think it's the right move for Governor Newsom to sue, or do I think it's the right move to send the National Guard?
For Governor Newsom to sue at this point in response to what the president's done?
I mean, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a big fan of lawsuits, but I think the bottom line is that the LAPD has said they have this protest under control. And when the LAPD has a protest under control, it doesn't help the situation to bring in troops. You bring in troops in America only in the most extreme circumstances because we're a democracy, and you don't politicize the military and ask them to act against American citizens. It's amazing that President Trump is so quick to call in the National Guard when he held off calling in the National Guard as armed people were assaulting the Capitol to try to overthrow a democratic election. Just bring it back to January 6th and think about how Trump was unwilling to bring in the troops then. He never called in active duty troops. I had a friend of mine from the Marines with the FBI literally sitting on a Blackhawk waiting to come up, and the president wouldn't let him go to save the lives of cops, to save the lives of his own vice president and other elected officials who these protesters, who these insurrectionists were trying to hang. So it's kind of amazing that Trump wants to do this in LA, and it's pretty obvious because he's always dreamed of politicizing the military and using it against what he sees as the left in America. So Trump wants to politicize the troops. Gavin Newsom is right to tell him to stop. I'm not sure a lawsuit's going to change it, but let's keep this in perspective with what the president is really trying to do here and what he was unwilling to do to protect the country back on January 6th.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting what happens today as this continues to unfold. Congressman, thank you so much for coming in this morning.